I don't know what the exercise was, but we're in three groups and I was chosen to stand up and represent our group and share something honorable. I can't remember what it was exactly, but it was meant to be representative of the group. And I thought I did a pretty good job of representing the group. Anyway, halfway through me sharing, this chick in my group is like, I don't agree with that. It's like starts blurting it out. I'm like, okay, keep going. She's like, I don't agree with that. That doesn't represent me, right? And like, this is in front of a room full of people. It's untoward. It wasn't like that was welcomed or anything like that. And I'm like, okay. Anyway, so she insists, she's like, you don't represent me. Starts going, you don't represent me. You don't, well, yeah, for whatever reason, or whatever was going on with her. I go into freeze. And we just spent all day learning about like nervous system regulation and trauma responses and all that kind of thing. And I legit went into freeze. I was like, shit, I'm standing up here in front of, I don't know, 60 people. And yeah, this chick's just basically said, like, in my mind, in my story, you're doing a shit job of representing us. I went into this freeze response. Anyway, after she'd kind of like piped down and they told her to like shut the fuck up, she piped down. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. I'm noticing my body in freeze now. I actually don't have, I can't continue. I can't actually continue. So I just needed to like cast it down. The interesting thing was what that had triggered for me was some kind of like public humiliation type trigger. And I spent the next like hour decompressing from it. It was like heavy. And that's one of the interesting things about those kind of like tantra embodiment type workshops and courses is you go through deep stuff. And I've always had these conversations where the value of that kind of space, because it's highly sexualized, is debatable, right? But for some people who may not trust going to a therapist, that might be the best way for them to move through really deep stuff. And most embodiment, whether it's very above board in a psychologist's office, like my mum is a somatic psychotherapist, right? So she deals with a lot of bodily processes to move through energy and specifically trauma. Or if you go into, you know, a sexualized environment, which is using sexual energy and embodiment, who's to argue one's better than the other if you get a good result, right? One's certainly more edgy than the other. So means to an end, yeah. And alternative therapies and remedies have a place in society. But the interesting thing was that, yeah, it took me like a good hour to regulate my system again. And what the solution was for me was like just to be held by someone, like someone just literally cupped their hands under my head and just like gently held my head. What it triggered and brought up was when I was in primary school, I don't know why this really got me, but like my teacher had a bit of go at me in front of the class because I forgot my spelling words. This in like year five. And so I don't know why it really got me, but I felt humiliated when that happened. I remember going home and telling my mom and whatnot because I was like publicly berated, basically, like in the front of the class, in front of everyone. And it felt really, really shit. And it was so interesting that that woman triggered something like that, but after having that experience, managing it in an embodied way, I was able to move through it. And that's like trauma healing 101. Yeah. You go back to the vibration of what was created and what's been repressed and you move through it. Well, it was repeated, but it was spiritual people might call it like alchemized, or I don't know exactly what the embodiment term is, but it's effectively you move through the energy of it and you allow yourself to feel all the emotion of the energy. And then it takes the edge of the trigger because you've felt through the experience rather than blocking out the experience statically. So you do re-experience it, but you re-experience it and you take the edge off. Yeah, it's like immunization, a little bit like that. There you go. So I'm all for public humiliation now. Bring it on. I felt the connection to that past energy, but that's the point. I'm not triggered. Yeah, the point is I'm not triggered. I remembered the memory, but I wasn't triggered by it. You got to try much harder to trigger me.